Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most interesting is that the most important updates are coming not even from the territory of Ukraine, but we have a lot of piece information that are coming from the countries that located around Ukraine or the countries that connected with the situation in Ukraine. First, let's talk about Belarus. Today, the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, reported that he took a decision, or the Russian authorities, government authorities took a decision to deploy a real nuclear weapon on the territory of Belarus by the 1st of July. Tactical nuclear weapon. And Vladimir Putin told us that that was some kind of reply to the decision of United Kingdom to support and to send the uranium-depleted ammunition to Ukraine. So that was the answer. And we see that the distance of Belarus is around, let's say, 500 kilometers. So we can say that the Russians, by deploying of the nuclear weapon on the territory of Belarus, managed to reduce the timing of rocket fly from the Belarus or from the Russian territory, let's say in direction of Europe or NATO countries, for a few seconds. But believe me, when talking about the current modern air defense systems, these few seconds can solve everything and can be a game changer during the possible nuclear war between countries. Now the important updates are coming from Syria, and these updates we received during the previous 24 hours. Some sources are saying that there were very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Deir ez-Zor on the south of Syria, and as you can see, this is the yellow. There are like two colors, red one and the yellow one. The yellow one is the territory under control of Kurds, and this red one is under control of Syrian official authorities. And there was a clashes on the border, and some sources are saying that Iranian forces were attacking the United States base that located on the yellow color territory. As a result of Iranian attack, the United States lost at least one soldier and a few civilians in this area, also the civilians and citizens of United States of America. As an answer to that provocation, the United States of America started their own bombing and shelling the territory of Syrian authorities, and as a result, one Iranian soldier and officer were killed. There were no more updates about the losses among the parties. I believe that the losses are much higher, but some Russian sources are saying that during those artillery duels between the Iranian forces and forces of the United States of America, there was a case of real combat, real fighting between Russian forces and the forces of the United States of America. I believe that parties took a decision to reduce the noise around this situation. And to tell the truth, we don't know the real number of real losses if there were such kind of clashes between the forces of Russian Federation that are deployed on the territory of Syria and the forces of United States of America. Anyway, this is very important. Furthermore, as you know, the head of General Staff, Mark Milley, reported that there are around few months left before Iran are able to create their own nuclear weapons. So as you can see, the Russians took a decision to answer very shortly to the Western countries in the NATO first. And as you can see, now we see that the Russians are going to deploy or to help the countries like Belarus and Iran to obtain their own nuclear weapon, and of course this can destabilize the entire situation in the world and not just in Ukraine. And now let's go and let's talk about Ukraine and about the situation on the ground. There are a lot of very interesting updates on the front lines from Kherson to Kupiansk and so on. But first, let's start with the Kupiansk front line, because today this is, I believe, that there are, let's say that Donbass is one of the most important front line because of almost complete encirclement of Avdeevka and almost complete encirclement of Bakhmut, but there are very heavy clashes also on the Kupiansk, or to be more precise, on the Liman front line, and there are very heavy clashes around Avdeevka. Let's return back to the Western sources map. Let's take a look at this area, and as you can see, according to this map, Avdeevka is still under Russian control, but as you can see, Avdeevka, let's we can say that have already appeared in some kind of salient in this area, and there are just few roads that leads to Makeivka to support. One of these roads are going from the south from Nevska in this area, and the second one goes through the Zhiribets river, this one, and so on. This map has a lot of differences with the Russian sources map and many other maps the Russians are saying, and almost every single map that we can find in the open source confirms that the towns that located on the north of Makeivka are under Russian control, like Novovodyanaya, Karamzinovka, Kovalivka. Let's take a look at the Russian sources map, and you're gonna see this, that these towns is under Russian control. So this is not important. The thing is that yesterday the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation in this area, they managed to get or to reach the outskirts of the town Makeivka. As we know, and if we take a look at the Russian sources map, the Ukrainians during the previous months managed to establish some kind of defense line along Zhiribets river, but on the western bank of Zhiribets river. And when talking about the eastern bank, there are no fortifications, and the Ukrainians were relying just on this residential and civilians area, trying to establish their positions inside these buildings and so on. Furthermore, I'll remind one more time that Makeivka is famous for the situation when the Ukrainians during their counter-offensive operation in this area in September of 2022 managed to encircle the Russian group on the outskirts of this town, and when that group surrendered, the Ukrainian soldiers in this area killed those Russian soldiers who surrendered. And today the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operations, they destroyed the bridge, this one, that the Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces in this bank of the river. They destroyed this bridge, and now the Ukrainians don't have any other possibility to supply forces in Makeivka just from the south, but I don't think that they're using this area, because as you can see, the distance between this road and the Russian artillery position is just less than 3 kilometers. So I believe that within the next few days we're going to receive a piece of information that the Russians establish control over Makeivka, and after that the Russians will be able to start movements to the south and to take every single town one by one, as they did a year ago. If you remember exactly, almost the same period of time, the Russians have already used this direction to attack in direction of Liman. First they took control over Tirny, Ivanovska, Yampolovka. All those towns were under Russian control. After that, there was a very fast and very interesting, very effective offensive operation in direction of Kremenaya. If you remember, in 2022, the Ukrainians lost Kremenaya almost without the clashes. I don't know what did happen there. Maybe that was some kind of intelligence operation or something like this, but Ukrainians left this town without even a single shot, and after that almost entire front line in this area collapsed, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back in direction of Liman and Zarechna. And during the next weeks of the previous year, there were very heavy clashes in this area. So we see that the Russians are trying to repeat the same situation. There's just one difference between the current situation and the situation a year ago. The year ago, all the territory that located on the west from Zhiribets river, and I'm talking about Kupiansk and all these towns, were under Russian control. So the Russians were attacking not just in direction of Zarechna from the Tirny and from Makeivka, they also were attacking from Kremenaya, Kupiansk in direction of Liman. So these are very important differences between this current situation, but I believe that maybe the Russians, this current situation, don't have such ambitious plans. They just want to take control over the eastern part of eastern bank of Zhiribets river, and this is maybe they're not going to develop more this bridgehead. Maybe this is enough according to their plans or something like this. Anyway, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on Kupiansk and Liman front line, the Ukrainians lost around 140 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system D-20. As you can see, the level of losses on the front line from Kupiansk, from this area to Liman, is not very high. And yesterday there was some kind of restore of the pressure, of the level of the pressure in this area, and as a result of Previous day, the Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers, so the difference is very big in comparison with the previous day. We see that now the Russians have something like wave, like their attacks and the reports looks like waves. Today they're showing like a big result, significant success. The next day we see that the level of losses of Ukrainians is too low in comparison with the previous day. Anyway, we see that the Russians have changed their tactic. Now we need to understand and analyze this data within the next days. In comparison, like we need data for a few weeks to understand what did happen and what have changed on this front line. Now let's move to Bakhmut and let's talk about Donbas front line. As we know, Donbas front line includes towns like Avdeevka and like Bakhmut and so on. And the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 155 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. Anyway, we see that the losses of Ukrainians are very high, but in comparison with the previous day, the losses are reduced almost on 200 soldiers. Yesterday, the Russians reported that Ukraine lost around 380 soldiers. So we can see that maybe yesterday the Russians had some progress, but today they took a decision to slow down and not to hurry and to try to attack in like comfortable situation without useless and nobody needs losses or something like this. The Russians are pushing from the north and they're trying to move along the streets that split along the railroad that split the northern part of Bakhmut. The Russians are pushing from the south because of the fact that we can say that there are residential area with very low buildings, and in comparison with the western part of Bakhmut where we can find very high buildings, or the northwestern part, this is the easiest area to attack. The Ukrainians made few attempts of counter-offensive operation, but anyway the Russians are pushing and the Ukrainians are stepping back. Furthermore, the Russians confirms about, and the Ukrainians as well confirms about, heavy clashes in the vicinity of this marketplace that located in the central part of Bakhmut. As the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians to develop this attack crossed the river Bakhmut in this area. But anyway, this is the clashes inside the Bakhmut. If you ask me, I'll give you my opinion. I think that these clashes, I don't know, is some kind of maybe useless, or so I don't think that it's like a thing that the Russians need, but they are forced to push in this direction because, as we see, the Russians don't have possibilities, or maybe they can't close the hat of this cauldron. They can't connect the forces that are going from the north, from Dubovo-Vasilievka to the south in direction of Kromova, and from the south in direction of Ivanovska. They can't connect these forces, and this situation forces the Russian to push the Ukrainians from the eastern part in direction of the central part, with one purpose: to push the Ukrainians from the central part in direction to the western part, and after that from western part to Chasov Yar. So the Russians are forced to use this tactic. Anyway, this is better than nothing, and as we can see, no matter the losses, no matter the situation, no matter the timings and the time that the Russians are forced to spend for this operation is pretty successful. We can find this information from all mappers, from all military officers or like soldiers on the ground, that this is pretty effective. The Ukrainians confirms and continues saying about the losses of Bakhmut and about the endless number of waves from the Russian side when they're trying to storm this area. Anyway, the situation in Bakhmut reminds me of the situation in Mariupol completely. The only difference with Mariupol is that Mariupol was completely encircled. There were a lot of forces from the Ukrainian side, and Mariupol didn't have any possibilities to resupply, to reinforce their forces inside of that small cauldron. And when talking about Bakhmut, we can say that there is the same situation, the only difference, and that physically the Ukrainians do have connections with the Chasov Yar using these fields, but these fields are under fire control, and everybody understands this, everybody know this. There are nothing new, nothing special. This area is under complete fire. Almost every single day we receive more and more photo and video confirmation of the situation, the quality of the road that connects Chasov Yar and Khromovo. These roads, I believe you saw like endless convoys from the Ukrainian side, not the convoys, but a single cars, light vehicles that were trying to cross this area, and there are like dozens of destroyed vehicles all over the road. And furthermore, today the Ukrainians, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made another attempt to send some reserves and reinforcements inside of Bakhmut, and that convoy were spotted by the Russians, and after that the Russians opened artillery fire. As a result of that attack, at least 50% of that convoy were destroyed, another 25% managed to enter Bakhmut, and the last 25% were forced to step back in direction of Chasov Yar. Situation is very complicated, and the timings works in Russian favor, because every single day soldiers that are blocked in Bakhmut need to use their weapon, they need to use food, they need to eat, they need to use medicine and so on, and their stocks are reducing every single day, and sooner or later, in a day or in a week, they will be completely out of everything, out of artillery support, out of ammo, out of shell, and so on. Maybe after that we are going to see another special operation that we used to see in Mariupol. If you remember, at some point of operation in Mariupol, the Ukrainians start sending their helicopters for some kind of evacuation of NATO soldiers, NATO officers from Mariupol, but most of those helicopters were shut down by the Russians. I believe that at some certain point of Operation Bakhmut we're going to see the same, and this is exactly going to be the point or piece of news, and based on that we can understand that situation in Bakhmut is gone, and there are no chances for the Ukrainians to save the town or something like this. Now let's go to the south, and let's talk about Avdeevka. The Russian sources are saying, or they provided the second confirmation of the fact that they established final control over Kamyanka. As you can see, the Russian source map is not updated yet. If we compare this map with the Western sources map, we see that the Kamyanka is under Russian control, but from the other side, the Western source map are saying that Vysyola is still under Ukrainian control. A lot of differences, but all these maps are showing the same picture, that Ukrainian forces that located in Avdeevka are in a big trouble. It's encirclement. We understand this. We are trained. We have experience. We can compare the situation with Bakhmut. Of course, a lot of people can say that there is no encirclement and so on. But even if we try to calculate the distance between the corners of Russian forces, is just 6 kilometers. And if we compare the same situation with Bakhmut, we can see that the distance between these two corners is around 5 kilometers. So is this completely the same situation that in Avdeevka and Bakhmut? But as we discussed, the difference between these two towns is that Avdeevka doesn't have its own Chasov Yar, because when talking about Bakhmut, there is a Chasov Yar very close to Bakhmut, and the distance between Avdeevka and Chasov Yar is just 7 kilometers, and you need just around 50 minutes to cross this area, and then they are going to be in completely safe and secured place. And Avdeevka doesn't have such a secure place, and the closest place where the Ukrainians are able to feel themselves in secure zone is Achertina, and it's around 15 kilometers, so twice as in comparison with Bakhmut. And furthermore, just Achertina, this small village, is maybe 10 times less than Chasov Yar. So the situation for the Ukrainians in Avdeevka is very difficult. Furthermore, the Russians started usage of their guided bombs in this area. They started doing this much more earlier in comparison with the Ukrainians, and when talking about the Ukrainians, they have a lack of these bombs, and if the Ukrainians do have such types of bombs, they are going to use them exactly just on the Zaporozhye direction for the greatest Ukrainian offensive operation in that area. And I think that they are not allowed to use this type of bombs on any other front line. Anyway, situation for the Ukrainians in Avdeevka is very difficult as well. Now let's go further and let's talk about the bridgehead on the south of Avdeevka. As you can see, the Russians have developed their bridgehead in this area, and as you can see, the Russians have changed their map. They're showing the progress along Vodiana, they're showing the progress along Pervomaysk. Today we had received from the Rybar that the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control and to get these streets that split Pervomaysk into two parts. So as you can see, this is a very important, very big progress from the Russian side, and they have almost reached the outskirts of Nitailov, of this area with that. And this area the Ukrainians were using to deploy the artillery system, and using this Nitailov, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians in Opytnaya, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians in Pesky, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians near in Staromykhailovka. So the Ukrainians were using this area to support the Ukrainians' defense forces and to spin down the Russian offensive forces that were attacking or trying to develop their bridgehead in the vicinity of Pesky. Now the Ukrainians are forced to step back from Nitailova and to deploy their artillery system much further to the west. And of course, this reduced the possibility of Ukrainian artillery forces at least for 6-7 kilometers. And to tell the truth, when talking about artillery system, this is pretty much and when talking about the old Soviet types of artillery systems, this is a very big distance and a very big difference in possibilities of Ukrainian artillery systems. Furthermore, if the Russians did establish control over the half of Performaiska, I believe that within the next few weeks we are going to, not weeks but days, we are going to receive another piece of information that the Russians established control over Nivolska, because from now on it is very difficult to supply and support this town. The only possibility is to supply this area using the fields, but this is not the best solution on the south of Ukraine to supply forces using fields because of poor quality of the ground at this period of year. Maybe in the months there were going to be no problems to support this town using fields, but this is not about this period of year. Furthermore, the Russians have updated their map around Mariinka. As you can see, now the Russians are saying that they control the northwest part of Mariinka and the north part of Mariinka. There are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians control the western ruins of this town, but I believe that the Russians are going to continue their push, their storm operation. It's very difficult to understand the real situation in South Donetsk area and the real plans of the Russians in this area. They were defeated in the vicinity of Uglidar, and as I understand, the Russians were forced to change their plans as a result of that defeat. And also the Russians are saying that when talking about South Donetsk area as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system D-30. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy another Polish crab. They were attacking Uglidar, Novomykhailovka, but as you can see, no progress on the ground, just the progress around Mariinka. When talking about Zaporozhye area, there were also artillery duels in this area without any changes on the ground. And as you can see, the Russians are saying that they destroyed a few howitzers, Getsin B in the vicinity of Gulaya Pole, but without any changes on the ground. The Ukrainians managed to accumulate a lot of forces in this area, and so I believe they wait for some orders, and according to a piece of information we have from the open source, the Ukrainians are planning to start their greatest offensive operation all over the front line, not just in Zaporozhye but also somewhere in the vicinity of Bakhmut, just in the second half of April. I don't think whether we need to believe these timings or not. The only thing I believe we need to believe is that the Ukrainians are going to start any counter-offensive operation. When talking about timings, I think that the timings can be changed, or maybe a week later or a week earlier, but anyway they're going to do something during the spring. And when talking about Kherson area as a result of artillery duels in this area, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system Gvozdika. Furthermore, as a result of combats all over the front lines of the special military operation, the Russians managed to shut down 11 drones, including 1 Bayraktar TB2. So that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.